Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. When my mom was around 15, she and her parents rented a 3-story old brick house in Germany. It was a temporary rental, and they were only planning to live there for a short time. One night, when my mother went to bed, she tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. She didn't know why, but she had a horrible gut feeling. Finally, she decided to sit up in bed, certain something was wrong. Before she could decide to go to her parents' room, she saw a figure standing outside her window. The outline of a man was visible, but the most noticeable detail was his red eyes. My mother wanted to scream, but something stopped her. Her room was on the 3rd floor of the house. There was no way anyone could be standing outside her window unless they had climbed up with a ladder, and surely, that would have made enough noise to wake the entire house. Something deep inside told her not to move. Instead, she lay back down and pretended to be asleep, even though she desperately wanted to run to her parents' room. The whole night, my mom lay frozen in fear, unable to sleep. When the sun finally rose, she looked back toward the window. The man was gone. She sighed in relief, but was still too shaken to sleep. She went to her parents' room and woke them up, telling them everything that had happened. My grandfather, her dad, walked to her room but didn't believe her. He thought she had a bad dream and assured her no one could have been at her window, given how high up it was. My mom begged them to believe her, explaining how scared she had been all night, but they dismissed her concerns. Over the next 2 weeks, my mom saw the man at her window 5 more times. She also constantly felt as though she was being watched in the neighborhood. Each time she told her parents, they insisted she was imagining it. One day, while visiting a next-door neighbor, my grandparents mentioned my mom's nightmares to the lady of the house. As soon as my grandfather described the man my mom had been seeing, the neighbor went pale as a ghost. She explained that a spirit had been haunting the area for decades, always standing outside the windows of young girls' rooms and watching them. No one knew why or when it had first appeared, but it never left once it found a new victim. Many believed it to be an evil spirit that preyed on young girls. Once the spirit had its eyes on someone, the girl would begin seeing the man everywhere, unable to escape his gaze. This revelation terrified my grandparents. They decided to move out of the rental house as quickly as possible. Luckily, since they had just moved in, most of their belongings were still packed, making the move swift. To this day, my mom is still deeply unsettled by this experience. She rarely talks about it, and when she does, it's clear the fear remains. About a decade ago, I used to work at a brewery pub set in a large, old building from the early 1900s. I worked there for a couple of years, and while most of the time it was pretty chill, albeit physically demanding, I had 2 experiences during my time there that I can only describe as supernatural. The first incident happened late one night when I was tasked with closing up the hangar/loading docks. Closing up involved clearing any obstructions where trucks would park, stacking loose crates, turning off the lights, and locking up. I was just about finished and had turned off the lights when, as I made my way to the door, a beer bottle came rolling towards me from the darkness between the tall stacks of crates. It wasn't forceful, more like someone had gently placed it on the ground and rolled it in my direction. I didn't think much of it, so I picked up the bottle and placed it in a half-empty crate. But as I turned to leave, another bottle rolled out from the same spot, then another. Tired and assuming it was a coworker trying to mess with me, I shouted, "Hey, alright, you got me. Come on, I gotta close up." I waited, expecting laughter or some response, but it was dead silent. Feeling a little uneasy, I turned on my flashlight and searched around the stacks of crates, expecting to find someone hiding. After thoroughly checking every corner, I gave up. I picked up the bottles, placed them in the same crate, turned off my flashlight, and called out, "Alright, I'm locking up. See you tomorrow." Just as I finished speaking, a crate full of bottles fell from one of the stacks and landed about 2 feet from me. Glass and beer went everywhere. The next day, I told my boss about the incident, but he shrugged it off, saying it was probably a rat. The thing is, those crates, when full, weighed around 20 pounds. How could a rat push one over? When I talked to my coworkers, they admitted they had experienced weird stuff during closing hours too. The second incident was even more chilling. This time, I was closing the pub. The last task was restocking the walk-in freezer, which was located underground beneath the bar. The freezer was old, probably as old as the building, and lacked any safety features. It couldn't be opened from the inside, as the door was just a flat steel panel with no handle on the inside. To keep the door open, I always wedged a keg in place. That night, I did the same and began restocking kegs and crates. I was halfway through when I heard the door slam shut. I rushed to the door, but it was locked tight. I pounded on it, but the only other person in the building was my boss, 2 floors above in his office, likely with the door closed. I tried my phone, but since I was underground in what was essentially a steel box, there was no signal. Wearing just jeans and a t-shirt, I quickly started to feel the cold. My face went numb and my hands became stiff. I made a makeshift blanket out of cardboard to stay warm, but it wasn't enough. As time passed, I began to panic. I started thinking about writing a goodbye note to my family and considered drinking myself to sleep using one of the kegs. The only reason I survived was because I had a date with a regular that night. She came looking for me when I didn't show up and asked my boss where I was. When he couldn't find me, he checked the basement and discovered me locked inside the freezer. I had been in there for about 45 minutes. When I got out, I noticed the keg I had used to prop the door open was on the other side of the room. It was a full steel keg, something that couldn't just slide away, let alone quietly. After that, my boss installed a chain to keep the door open, but I refused to go back into that freezer again. I quit the job shortly after, though for unrelated reasons. The city had been suffocating me, the constant noise, the never-ending hustle, the relentless pressure. At 32, I felt decades older. I needed an escape, a place where silence was the loudest noise, where life moved at the pace of the rising and setting sun. I found a quaint Airbnb in the countryside, a log cabin surrounded by dense woods, far from the maddening crowd. It seemed like a dream, a perfect retreat. Little did I know, it was a nightmare in disguise. Upon arrival, the cabin was as charming as the pictures, rustic, isolated, and peaceful. But as the sun set, its true nature began to emerge. At first, it was subtle. The wooden floor creaked under my feet, even when I wasn't moving. A peculiar smell lingered in the air, sweet, yet metallic. The wind howled through the trees like a mournful cry. Then came the oddities. The mirrors didn't reflect my image correctly. My reflection lagged, as if it were another person mimicking my movements. The paintings on the walls seemed to shift when I looked away, their subjects twisting into grotesque figures. As night fell, the whispers began. Soft, eerie voices emanated from the walls, speaking of sorrow, loss, and something darker than I dared imagine. Then, at midnight, I saw it, the figure. Every night, it appeared in the window, a silhouette standing in the woods, watching. It never moved, never approached, just watched. Despite the terror that gripped me, I couldn't leave. The cabin had ensnared me in its eerie charm. Every morning, I resolved to leave, but by nightfall, I was drawn deeper into the mystery. What was this place? What secrets did it hold? Why wouldn't it let me go? Days turned into weeks. The whispers grew louder, the figure seemed closer, and the cabin's peculiarities became more pronounced. One day, while pacing the cabin, I stumbled upon a trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug. It led to a basement I hadn't known existed. The air was damp, carrying the same sweet yet metallic smell I'd noticed on my first day. In the dim light, I saw symbols etched into the stone walls, ancient and unfamiliar, their patterns making my head spin. At the center of the room stood a wooden pedestal with an old leather-bound book atop it. As I approached, the whispers grew into a cacophony. Words emerged, a chant repeating over and over in a language I didn't understand. Trembling, I opened the book. Its yellowed pages were covered in the same symbols from the walls. In the middle of the book was a drawing that made my blood run cold, the cabin. In the window stood a figure, the same one I saw every night. But in the drawing, the figure wasn't outside the cabin, it was inside, staring directly at me. Horrified, I dropped the book. The room plunged into silence. I felt a presence behind me. I didn't want to turn around, but knew I had to. Slowly, I turned, and there it was, the figure. No longer a silhouette, it was a ghastly apparition, like despair given form. Its hand reached for me, cold yet burning. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. When its hand touched my face, a wave of emotions flooded through me: sadness, anger, fear, despair. These weren't my emotions. They were its. Suddenly, I was somewhere else, still in the cabin, but different. It was alive, filled with people. I was seeing through someone else's eyes, feeling their emotions, living their memories. I realized I was the apparition. The cabin wasn't a home. It was a prison, a place of punishment for those who dared defy the natural order. The apparition was not a ghost, but a prisoner, trapped for eternity. I felt its loneliness, its despair. It was overwhelming. When I came back to myself, I was in the basement. The apparition was gone. The next morning, I left the cabin. As I walked away, I felt its gaze on me, not menacing, but grateful. I had shared its pain, its solitude. I glanced back one last time. In the window, the figure stood watching me leave. But it wasn't alone. Beside it stood another figure, me. Though I'd left the cabin, part of me remained, forever tied to its haunting secret. Weeks later, back in the city, the chaos feels unchanged, but I am not the same. The cabin left its mark on me in ways I'm still trying to understand. Every night, I dream of it, of the figure in the window. But the dreams aren't nightmares. They're almost comforting. It's strange, being connected to something so far away and so otherworldly. Yet, somehow, it feels like a part of me now. Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror.